The fun of 2026 49ers roster construction is beginning. We have signing news. The 49ers have inked 14 players to reserve future contracts, and that marks the beginning of the big build that we're going to cover in depth during this offseason. Now, a big question is, will Jauan Jennings remain in San Francisco? He is not one of the 14 who signed a contract today. And I wrote about it on the San Francisco Standard, and the quote is hilarious. Jauan Jennings thought that he was coming to a beautiful place like San Francisco when he first joined the 49ers as a 7th-round draft pick out of Tennessee in 2020. Instead, he landed in Santa Clara. Doesn't mean that we have to stop doing our videos from spots like this, like the Palace of Fine Arts. But, you know, with Robert Salah leaving to the Tennessee Titans, a big question is, will he bring players like Jauan Jennings with him? Because the Titans, that they might be looking at Jauan Jennings as a culture builder for their team. They've got about $100 million in salary cap space. They're probably much more capable of overpaying somebody like Jauan Jennings. Like the 49ers intentionally overpaid Pierre Garçon back in 2017 when Kyle Shanahan needed a veteran wide receiver to help set the culture. Well, Jauan might follow Robert Salah. And if he doesn't, if there isn't a team willing to pay him 20 plus million, maybe he settles for something between 12 and 15 million with the 49ers and he returns. But the way that Jauan was speaking in that locker room yesterday during the locker room clean out for the 49ers indicated that he is at least entertaining the idea of the end being here. And it was a hell of a run if it is the end for Jauan Jennings. Ever since 2020, he has been the guy that has antagonized opposing teams. He's the guy that you love having on your own team, but you hate if he's somewhere else. And I'm sure that the 49ers probably would not enjoy playing against Jauan Jennings if he ends up on their schedule at some point for another team. But the good news is if he goes to the Titans, you're probably not going to be facing him anytime soon. So we'll keep our eye on Jauan Jennings. Here are the 14 signings that the 49ers made, and I'm going to talk about each one of these players very briefly. These are the reserve future contracts. All of these guys were in the locker room to end the 2025 season, but were on expiring contracts, and the 49ers now have them on the team through at least 2026 in this offseason. Isaac Alarcón, who's their international exception player from Mexico. He's an offensive lineman. They brought back the defensive tackle Evan Anderson, who was on the practice squad for all of 2025. He played some in 2024, but was essentially pushed out of playing time by the new guys, by CJ West and by Alfred Collins in 2025. The cornerback Eli Apple, the veteran, is back on the 49ers roster, signing the reserve future deal. They brought back Junior Bergen, the return specialist, who was the 7th-round draft pick out of Montana. William Bradley King, veteran defensive end, back in the building. Derek Canteen can play cornerback and can play safety. He was good on the 49ers practice squad this year. He's back as well. The defensive end, Andrew Farmer II, is back with the 49ers. He's an edge rusher who they brought in late in 2025. Derek Forrest, the 49ers signed him to a practice squad contract just a few days ago to bolster their depth at safety. They have now given him the reserve future deal to stick aboard throughout the 2026 offseason. Jalen Graham back for San Francisco as well. Adrian Martinez, that's a linebacker. He's been around for a while, the pick out of Purdue. Adrian Martinez, quarterback. Shout out to Clovis West High School. Shout out to Hanford, California. Adrian back with the football team in this offseason. So is the center, Drake Nugent, who played for Stanford. The offensive tackle, Brandon Parker, a veteran, formerly of the Raiders, who's given the 49ers some good depth at that tackle position, is going to be back this offseason. So is Malik Turner, good specialist, wide receiver, wore number 81, saw some time for San Francisco in Week 18 against the Seahawks on offense. He's going to be back in there. And so is Sebastian Valdez, defensive tackle, the Hulk, who got called up from the practice squad 3 times this year so the 49ers can give him a pay raise. They didn't even activate him from the practice squad. He was inactive on game day, but he got the nod so he would get a 53-man salary instead of a practice squad salary. So those are the 14 signings that the 49ers made. Let's take one more look at the Palace of Fine Arts, give you guys some of the history before I give you the KMBR interview. It was a good way to wrap up the season with the Gregs on KMBR. But the Palace of Fine Arts, built for the Pan-Pacific Exposition in the early 1900s, when you watched my flying video the other day with Byron, I said, we flew right over this, and I said, this whole neighborhood, the marina, blocks of it used to look like this, looked like Lake Como. And then they decided to build the housing that we see over in that direction instead. But they decided to preserve this area, right where we are standing right now, to make it look like it did during that exposition in the early 1900s. Anyway, that is our live look here from the Palace of Fine Arts. Enjoy the interview with KMBR. I think that this put a nice bow on the 2025 season.
John and Kyle set to talk tomorrow, and we're going to learn a lot more, but how are you today?
I'm doing good. Just had some coffee out here in North Beach. Finally have a chance to just enjoy the city and this weather a little bit with the season ending. Stuff slowing down. So it's been good to reset, and it was a hell of a journey. It's crazy that it's 4+ months ago when the 49ers were up at Seattle to begin the season, and a little poetic that they ended the season there, but you saw the difference that the loss of personnel made between the first game and the last game of the season.
And certainly, the last game of the regular season and what they were able to accomplish, Seattle, and then having to go to Philadelphia and Seattle and what happened on Saturday night, David. So rest up for a little bit, but you'll be back at it tomorrow, and I know you're analyzing everything. And the news of the offseason starts right away with the news this morning that Robert Salah, or late last night, Robert Salah has taken the Tennessee job, which surprised me. The word was, and we even heard John Lynch say it on this station, that he would be more discerning as far as ownership and a good opportunity. I'm not sure the owner in Nashville qualifies, and it's a loaded division. They do have salary cap space, but tell me what you think this does, and is it a foregone conclusion? And I remember texting you early in the year, who's the ball father? Who's the one that's given the speech as far as the takeaways? And you said it was Gus Bradley. They didn't take the ball away a whole lot, but I know his bedtime stories Saturday night before games were riveting, and he is quite the speaker and a great track record. So what do you think of Salah taking this job? It isn't a foregone conclusion that Gus Bradley will be the 49ers' next defensive coordinator.
Well, what Gus Bradley also did was he designed a lot of the red zone plays this year, and that's the one area where the 49ers defense really statistically held it together versus everywhere else because they had so many injuries. But they finished ranked number 24 defensively in EPA, and they finished 15 in the red zone. So I think Bradley definitely deserves some credit for that. I still wonder, does Bradley follow Robert Salah to Tennessee? That's also a possibility. But so Robert wants to call the defensive plays this time around. He didn't back in New York. Jeff Ulbrich was his defensive coordinator in New York. So I think that makes it less likely that somebody like Gus Bradley does follow him to Tennessee. Would make sense for the 49ers. Last time they also interviewed Daniel Bullocks, he's the DB coach. He's been with this staff since Kyle Shanahan joined in 2017, and he's really graduated up to the role of pass game specialist. So he has been doing a lot of game planning and a lot of scheming for the 49ers. I would say that's a dark horse candidate. And, with the way that D'Amico Ryans and his meteoric ascent worked back in 2021 when Robert Salah first left, he went from co-linebackers coach to defensive coordinator, and then a couple years later was the head coach of the Texans. I don't think that you can rule out KJ Wright. Now, I'm not sure if they like KJ Wright. I know they like him, but they just love D'Amico Ryans. He was always on that fast track. But the fact that was possible for somebody who was an ex-linebacker, freshly out of his playing career, just in an assistant linebackers coach role, the fact that it was possible for him to graduate straight up to a defensive coordinator role, I think makes us at least mention KJ Wright right now. Those would be the internal candidates for the 49ers. There is a strong argument to be made because they've now had this is 3 defensive coordinators in 3 years, and you start to say, okay, well, continuity at some level is important. Can Kyle Shanahan get his Steve Spagnuolo? That is a defensive coordinator no longer is interested in head coaching jobs, so you don't have to worry every single off season that he's going to leave. And just so happens that Raheem Morris, who's been a head coach twice, just got fired by the Falcons, is good friends with Kyle Shanahan, might be available to be the 49ers defensive coordinator. And somebody who's already been in a head coaching position 2 times could fit into that Spagnuolo type of role. So I wouldn't be shocked if the 49ers looked outside in this case as well, if that Gus Bradley situation is not the way that they go. And obviously another name to peripherally keep in mind is Jim Schwartz. He's still under contract with Cleveland, though, and he's in the running to be the head coach there. But if he doesn't become the head coach of the Browns and they release him from his contract, he runs a wide nine. So he's connected to what the 49ers have schematically like to do with their front. And we know that Schwartz falls into the bucket of a defensive coordinator who probably is not going to be a head coach anymore, especially if he doesn't get this Cleveland job, and could become the 49ers version of Spagnuolo.
Well, David, you took the words right out of my mouth because, you mentioned Jeff Ulbrich, and we know he's going to be staying put. Raheem Morris has a close relationship with Kyle Shanahan, and I was going to ask about Jim Schwartz as another name where there is an element of familiarity, not so much from the same coaching tree, but even when the Niners played Cleveland this year, going into that matchup, as bad as Cleveland's season was, we know that Shanahan has struggled with Schwartz in the past, and to your note, he does run a wide nine in that scheme. And so how likely would you say, if they're going to go with an outside search, do you feel like Jim Schwartz is something that you're looking at maybe is kind of in the long shot realm right now, or would you put that on the short list of real possibilities?
Well, Cleveland has to let him go first. And,
yeah.
The ownership there was insistent on keeping him because that was the only good portion of that team was their defense. So I understand that from a certain level, but whenever ownership is sketchy, and I think that Cleveland qualifies for that, you never know how they're going to act, and they theoretically could hire a new coach and keep on the defensive coordinator just because the owner says so. So if he does become a free agent, then I do think that it is a possibility because I think that there's a real mutual respect there. And I think that would be kind of funny for longtime 49ers fans because you think back to 2011 when Schwartz was the coach of the Lions, and that was the whole handshake gate with Jim Harbaugh, right? That early season.
And Bob Lang jumped in the middle of that. He wanted a piece of Schwartz.
Yeah, so I think it'd be hilarious if it came full circle and Jim Schwartz became the defensive coordinator of the 49ers. But I just don't know. Cleveland and, you started this interview talking about sketchy franchises. I agree. I didn't think that I thought Robert Saleh might file Tennessee into that bucket, but his agent talked last night, and he said that Robert thinks this is an awesome opportunity. He probably likes the $100 million in cap space and might believe in Cam Ward and thinks he can get it done in Tennessee. I personally believe that the right opportunity at head coach has nothing to do with cap space or the quarterback that's currently in. It's more to do with making sure you're on the same page with the GM. And I think if you get hired in a different cycle than the GM, then it just sets things up for a lot of problems. That was the problem with Vrabel and Rand Carthon, and Rand Carthon came over there with the 49ers. And it was a problem with San Francisco with Trent Baalke back in the day. And that's why Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch made sure that they came together and were tied at the hip. And it's obviously worked really well for the 49ers.
And Salah recently hired Doug Hendrickson, Bay Area agent. He and C.J. LeBoy run Wasserman Football based in Marin County and Larkspur Landing, and good people. So he said, the quote was, he's over the moon for that job, but a lot of people are surprised. So and what does this all mean as far as Robert Salah? And they do have a lot of cap space in Nashville. Mike McDaniel, by the way, is interviewing for the head coaching job of the Raiders today. The obvious choice with Salah would be, yes, he's going to run the defense, and he said that. He said, well, what's the major change you're going to make if you go back and be a head coach? And he said, I'm going to call, which means I'm going to call the defense. But I think the big thing, in particular with Cam Ward, this young quarterback with his yet to be fully refined and developed mechanics, throwing the ball, his footwork is all over the place, the arm drops. Who might be his offensive coordinator? Is there anybody on the 49ers staff? And it's obviously not going to be Clay Kubiak, but one thing you think about right away is him taking coaches from John and Kyle, how are they going to work that out? And then just taking players off the roster with their cap space, like a Jauan Jennings or someone. Just what are your thoughts on that?
I was about to say that. Yeah, well, I mean, Jauan Jennings is from Murfreesboro, which is just outside of Nashville, and he's the guy that wants the payday, and I think deserves the payday. He's put his body through a lot. He bet on himself this year instead of taking a deal that he thought was too small from the 49ers. So he's earned his way into free agency, and he's going to be able to take the highest offer if that's the way that he wants to go. Jauan was emotional in the locker room yesterday, so I do think that Jauan heading back home to Tennessee to help build the culture for Robert Saleh with the Titans would make a whole lot of sense. If you think, thinking back to 2020, Robert Saleh and Jauan Jennings actually overlapped with the 49ers in Saleh's final year in stint one with San Francisco. So Jauan was on the practice squad that year and he got hurt, so he didn't really become a prominent name until 2021. But that connection with Robert Saleh does go back all the way to 2020. And there is the Nashville connection. So I definitely would keep an eye on that. Two, as far as offensive coordinators go, keep an eye on Brian Fleury. He's a rising coaching star. He's been scheming up the 49ers run game for quite some time now. He even took that title this past season. He has coached basically every single position. It's one thing the 49ers really, really like about him. Kyle Shanahan's a big believer in because Kyle himself was a defensive guy at the start of his career under John Gruden when he was a quality control coach. And he believes that if you, even if you're a defensive coach, if you worked with the offense, you know how to attack offenses and vice versa. And I think Brian Fleury, having coached all these different positions with the 49ers, primarily he's worked with George Kittle and the tight ends, but he's graduated into that run schemer for the 49ers. It would not shock me, especially since all of these bigger names like Mike McDaniel will probably get head coaching jobs. I mean, Mike McDaniel might end up in Buffalo. If that happens, then you have to start looking at these lesser known names, the next wave. And I think Brian Fleury could get an opportunity like that in Tennessee. Now, the good news for the 49ers is that this is a very amicable split with Robert Saleh. It's something that they saw coming either this year or the next. And it's something I'm sure they talked about when they hired him. They're going to sit down on good terms and I think come to good, a good landing spot for what happens with a lot of these assistants. I think that there are times when departures are not as amicable. Probably with Liam Cohn last year leaving Tampa Bay is a really good example where, poachings and uncomfortable situations, losing staff members becomes much more of a danger. But I think the 49ers and Saleh will work things out so it works for both sides.
A few more minutes here with David Lombardi on the UMA guest line. What do you think they'll ultimately do this offseason to rebuild that wide receiver position? Because if you think about the past couple of years, chose to trade Deebo Samuel after a down year. The Aiyuk situation devolved into a disaster. Pearsall has great ability, though not always availability, as we saw this year. And while I do love Jauan Jennings, I don't know if they'll want to pay him $25 million a year or something within that realm. So certainly one of the roster holes that they got to address. And what do you ultimately foresee happening this offseason for John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan there?
Well, I mean, we really, really clearly understand based on what transpired in 2024 and 2025 when they just couldn't separate. Unless they had absolutely everybody who was in the building on the field. That's obviously minus Aiyuk since he wasn't in the building. But we see why they went to hell and back to finish that Brandon Aiyuk deal in 2024. They obviously quickly regretted it, but that X receiver position is so important for creating space across the whole field. And they ranked last in separation at the time of catch or incompletion in 2024. Not surprisingly, because Aiyuk missed most of the season, and Pearsall, that was the year after he got shot, and he was still a rookie. He didn't come on until the final couple games of the year in terms of big time productivity, and they ranked low again this year. And then, I'm sure you got an idea watching on TV on Saturday night, but in person it was even more stark. I mean, because you could see the whole field, and you could see there was nobody to throw to. They were not creating any space against the Seattle defense. So they're going to have to make some splashes here. I don't necessarily think that they'll make an A-list $30+ million splash, but I think you've got to make a notable mid-tier receiver signing at the very least in free agency, somebody who can truly that brings some separation ability. And I think that you have to use one of your more valuable draft picks at the position. Now, you did just use that first rounder, number 31 overall, on Ricky Pearsall in 2024, and you're not giving up on him just yet. I mean, I think the main thing to remember is that Ricky, when he has been available, has been somebody who has changed the math in a positive way for the 49ers geometrically as far as the spacing downfield. The problem has been that availability. And you have to hope that he fully gets over this PCL over the next few months. He finally has time to properly rest it. And he needs to be at least their number 2 moving forward. Preferably, you'd want him to be a number 1, but I don't know if you can count on that. That's why I think they need to stack some numbers at that receiver position. And Brock Purdy has shown that if he has a reasonable amount, he will make it work. Like, even with an unreasonable amount of help, he made it work in Philadelphia. But by the time they got to Seattle against a very, very elite defense with nothing in the cupboard, no George Kittle, I mean, Pearsall was hobbling along. It just wasn't possible. So they need more ammo at that receiver position.
David, what happens with Brandon Aiyuk? Do we just wait till March the 9th or probably March 11th when the actual new league year starts? Do they just cut him off the football team? I can't imagine there's a market to trade him. Would that be the route they have to go, is just release him and cut him? Right now, I have them for just a little bit under the top 51 cap space at a little under $35 million, 13th in the league. If they do that, how much money do they free up? Will they just have to cut BA?
Well, it's interesting because right now he's not getting paid because he's on the left squad list. So if the 49ers want to send a message, they could actually not cut him. They could kind of hold him hostage and, force him to eventually report and then maybe think about cutting him then. But financially, at this point, since he's literally left the building and has not been seen at the building, I guess he was seen on Tasman right by the building on his Instagram video or his YouTube video for a little bit there. But since he's left the building, the 49ers here can just sit on this and continue to own the contractual rights until something moves, or they can cut him just to be done with it. The thing is, like, if you keep him right now, you don't have to face any of the dead money acceleration of his contract, because what they did when they paid the $30 million signing bonus is they stretched that out over 5 years, right? And if they don't want to take those cap hits now, because anytime you cut somebody or trade somebody, they accelerate the hit now. You could theoretically keep him around, and because he's not reporting to the building, you don't owe him anything right now. So I think the ball might still remain in Brandon Aiyuk's court moving forward. It's an unprecedented situation. I think the 49ers are still scratching their heads, like, well, what exactly is his headspace right now? And obviously, it's a sad situation too. Just from a team-wide perspective, you saw where the deficiencies were down the stretch, and they could have badly used. And Brandon Aiyuk, even at 70 or 80% of his former capabilities, but when he walked out on the team, that became impossible.
Well, David, we appreciate you being with the team and offering that reporting all season long. I know this was, you just wrapped up year number 10 on the 49ers beat. Is that correct?
This was year 9. My first year was Shanahan and Kyle. Yeah. So I'm going to be entering year 10. I don't think they're going to be putting my name up on the wall though next year. But.
Okay. So you can all hit that decade celebration together. Maybe it's better that way anyway. The reward will be a little bit sweeter as everybody heals up and rests up. And I know we got John and Kyle tomorrow, but once the dust has settled a little bit, and then we got the combine and the draft, make sure you spend extra time getting some North Beach coffee, enjoying some city weather, and just getting to recoup a little bit.
Yeah, well, my wife is with me here, and she was like, yeah, did we fly back to Nashville? We spent most of the off season there, and then we look up the weather, and it says polar vortex, and we said, no, we're going to stay in San Francisco. Everything will be okay.
Salah's not luring you to Nashville. I'm going to put a block on that right now. I'm going to send him a text. He's not taking you.
I saw him in the locker room in Seattle, and I said, good luck with the interview search and all that. I didn't think he was going to take the Titans job. I would have said something about it, but no, I will not be following him to Nashville. Year 10 is coming up, and George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk are both going to get their names up on the wall in the hallway there as 10-year players next season, which is going to be a cool moment because it's been a hell of a journey covering those guys since the very beginning of their time with the 49ers.
Never a dull day, right?
Never. There has not been a dull day. Even when I look back at 2017, that first year, for a 6-10 team, that was the most exciting 6-10 season you could ever dream of because they went from 1-10 to 6-10. They won their final 5 games. They might have won a playoff game or two with how well they were playing at the end of that season.
Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, that was pre-ACL. Jimmy Garoppolo was playing at. I mean, the metrics were number one in the league that year. It was. It's been a magical run, and I thought this was one of the most gratifying seasons that I ever covered because I love charting the overcoming of adversity and those kind of stories. And it was awesome this year to see the team. Well, here I'll end with this. We never have seen a 13-win team this injured, and we never will see a 13-win team with this kind of injury toll again. I think what the 49ers did this year was historic as far as overcoming all that adversity as far as players missing games.
Is that a fact historically as far as player manpower missed games? This is the winningest team in the history of the NFL, David?
Well, a lot of that is subjective because, I think amount of the games, I could look up the numbers for that. But I think when I think of the future Hall of Famers that this team lost,
the quality of player
that
they
for
lost.
sure, right? Yeah, the quality of player that they lost this season. I mean, there are multiple guys that will be in Canton that were unavailable. Plus the quarterback position was QB1. I mean, Purdy was fantastic when he came back. So you saw what the 49ers were missing. Now, the reason they were able to pick up the slack is because Mac Jones played so well. But that's just emblematic of the resilience and the way that they were able to step up. And I really don't think, especially in this salary cap era, that we're going to be able to see something like what we saw again. So it might have ended up very disappointing in Seattle, but to beat the defending world champions on top of the 12-win regular season on the road in the playoffs, as shorthanded as they were, with Kittle popping his Achilles in the first half of that game, I mean, it was remarkable. It was an honor to cover this team.
Well, we won't hold you from your wife any longer. We appreciate your time today, and thanks for coming by the show.